Appreciate him filling in last week. He does a great job. I've been listening to him about 38 years now, and he always brings some good things. I loved the Wings of the Morning. When he brought that up, I watched it online, and just wonderful. And so let's give Jeff McCleese a hand for speaking tonight.
Down, put the microphone on, and looks like Josh is running the camera tonight, so this ought to be interesting. All right, Josh, you ready? Are we ready? I know that. I'm just waiting. Are you ready? You don't have to put it on me, but I got to go over here real quick. I want you guys, we're going to be turning in our songbooks to the second song. So get us, if there's a songbook in front of you, what kind of Baptist church is this? There's no songbooks around here. Here's one right here. I'm going to use it. If there's a songbook underneath you, we're going to look at a song. Does anybody know who Robert Robinson is? Ever heard of a guy by the name of Robert Robinson? If you did, you're amazing, because there's no way you're going to know who he is. He was a guy that was born in 1735. He died in 1790. When he was 7 years old, his father passed away. His father was like a customs, whatever. Something fell here. Another Baptist thing. You have a Bible filled with bulletins. So anyway, his dad died when he was 7 years old. And this Robert Robinson grew up under the influence of an uncle who didn't like the family and a grandfather besides his mother. But he basically was raised by his mom. And Robert Robinson got into a bad group of guys when he was in his teenage years. And when he was 19 years old, maybe 20 years old, something like that, he decided he wanted to go to a local revival in England. I forgot to mention, he lived just outside of England, or just outside of London in England. Him and a couple other boys thought they would go in and go into a revival service and just be the center of attention. They weren't bad kids. They were just guys that liked to stir up stuff. So they go in, and the speaker at that time was a guy by the name of George Whitefield, which at that time was a very famous evangelist in England and would come to the United States and would occasionally do revival services in the United States as well. This is in the mid-1700s. Well, he goes in, excuse me, I'm going to be fighting with this all night. He goes in to this revival service, and while he's sitting there, he's listening to this George Whitefield. Well, all the boys, they get up and leave. He decides to stick around. He's intrigued. And Robert Robinson started going to, he went to all the rest of George Whitefield's meetings. And about 3 years later, right around when he was about 22 years old, he decided to give his life to Christ. And Robert Robinson, when he was in his early 20s, now a saved man, he would do things like he would write poems. The hymnals you have, and if you have it on your lap or sitting there on a seat or somewhere, most of hymns, typically were poems that were written, and music was put to them later. We're in a completely different world than what they were back in the 1700s. Writing and reading was so important. Nowadays we have phones and videos and Snapchats and everything else, where back then it was poems and stuff. So Robert Robinson began writing poems. Well, the first one he writes, or the first one in this book here, is song number 2, Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, calling for songs of loudest praise. When he wrote this, he was walking with God closely. He was very faithful. And over a period of time in his 30s and 40s, he got out of the will of God. And when he was in his early 40s, he was riding a stagecoach in London. And the stagecoach had a bunch of people in it. And while he's in there, there's this woman over in the corner. She's got this little tiny book. And she's flipping through it, and she's reading it. Well, someone in the stagecoach, and there's a bunch of people in the stagecoach. And one of these persons said, "What are you reading?" She goes, "Oh," she said, "I got this book." She said, it's an amazing book. She said, "Let me read some of this stuff to you." So she starts reading this poem. And Robert Robertson is inside this stagecoach at the time. And she goes on as she begins reading this poem, and he recognizes it right away. He had written this in his 20s. 20 years later, it ended up in this little book of poems. She goes, "Hitherto thou love has blessed me. Thou hast brought me to this place, and I know thy hand will bring me safely home by thy good grace. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God, here to rescue me from danger, bought me from his precious blood." She's reading this stuff to him. And she's reading it to everybody. And she looks at Robert Robinson, and she starts the last verse. "Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wondering heart to thee." And this is where he had to stop her. He goes, "Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love." And He stopped her. He said, "Lady, I wrote that poem." And it was right after this, when this was brought to his attention, it wasn't long after this, he got back into church. He eventually became pastor of what's called the St. Andrew Avenue Baptist Church that still exists today. I looked them up on Facebook. They're going to have services on Sunday. What we're going to find here with Jonah is Jonah's going to have one of those Robert Robinson moments. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time backtracking what we talked about. What we left last week, he was on a boat. So let's go to Jonah chapter 1. Jonah chapter 1. We're going to start with verse 3. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa. And remember, just a quick backtrack, God had spoke to Jonah and said, "I want you to go to Nineveh," which was the arch enemy of the Jewish nation. And he was not going to go there because he knew he was going to die. They were going to kill him. And he didn't want the Assyrians, the Ninevites, even to know who God was. He didn't want them to know. So he flees. And he says, "I'm going to Joppa." He's going to get on a ship to go to Tarshish. If you remember last week we talked about it, where he lived at in Gath-Hepher to Nineveh was a 500-mile. He got on a boat to go across the Mediterranean Sea all the way over here to where I've erased it. But right here was Tarshish, the furthest civilized city that you could possibly go at that time. He said, "I'm getting away." It was 2,500 miles away. So he gets on. He goes down to the dock. He looks around. He goes, "Well, there's one going to Rome. No. There's one going to Carthage. No. Here's one going to Tarshish. It's the furthest away. That's where I'm going to go." And he goes in, and he talks to these sailors, these Phoenician sailors. It says, "Do you have room for one more?" "Yes, we do." We're going to find, and this is what I think is in verse 3, I think something happens here. It says he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof and went down into it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Twice in that verse, it mentions that he's trying to run from the presence of the Lord. Remember, we talked about the omnipresence of God last week, for those of you here last week. Even what Scott had mentioned a minute ago, the wings of dawn or the wings of the morning, it's also called, talking about the sunlight as it comes over the horizon, and it washes the landscape as it hits at 186,000 feet per second. That's how you can't even get away from God going that fast. So when the psalmist says this, and Jonah, forgetting about the omnipresence of God, takes off, goes across, trying to get away. So, I think it was at this time when he bought the ticket. I think he told those Phoenician sailors, "Take me, I got to go to Tarshish. Get me far away as you can. I'm running from God." So he says, verse 4, "But the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken." The word "sent out," the Hebrew word means hurled. Think about a pitcher throwing a ball, a major league pitcher throwing a ball, a fastball, to a catcher. hurled. He hurled this wind at this boat. I was talking to Dad the other night. Dad was on an LST when he was in the Navy in the late 60s, early 70s. And I think we talked about it a little bit. I forgot to look it up, absolute. But I think somewhere around this LST was somewhere around 350, 360 feet long, something like that. Out in the ocean, that is a small ship. He was in a tiny ship. Compared to the battleships, the aircraft carriers, the destroyers, and everything else, it was a tiny ship. And he would go to convoys. And actually, the weird thing is Dad spent most of his Navy life traveling this same ocean, Atlantic Ocean, into the Mediterranean, from the Mediterranean across to the Caribbean, back to the Mediterranean to the Caribbean. I don't know how many trips he made. But he would go across this thing all the time. Now, the interesting thing about storms in the Mediterranean is I looked this up too. The average storm waves of in the Mediterranean is right around 30 feet tall. 30-foot waves. The highest recorded they had was 44 feet. What's the ceiling height here? About 27. 20 to the very top? 3 feet higher than that are waves, one after the other. Now this ship that the Phoenicians had, they would go back and forth to Tarshish. Joppa was a major seaport. They figured that this boat was somewhere around 90 feet long, no longer than 90 feet long. And the funny thing is you always have this idea that there might have been 3 or 4 people on this boat. I say there was probably a crew of maybe 25, 30, 35, maybe 50 guys on it. So this Phoenician ship is taken off. Where are you going? We're going to Tarshish. I want a ticket. Can I go? He gets on it, and as they go, the wind kicks up. God throws this wind, and it creates these waves that are way high. It says, but the Lord sent out, verse 4, a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. It was a wooden ship. Mast is about to break. The sails are ripping, and it's filled with very seasoned Phoenician sailors. I mean, if there's one thing you remember about Phoenicia is that they were a seafaring nation. They were all sailors. Everybody was in there. My family, I was the one that broke the mold. I'm the only non-Navy guy in our family. I think everybody else in Dad's family was, John Paul Jones may have been one of my family members for all I know. It goes back that far. It says, then the mariners were afraid and cried out every man unto his God and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea to lighten it of them. But Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he lay and was fast asleep. Now, the thing about this, number one, this ship, a 90-foot ship, and 30-foot to 40-foot waves would have been like a cork in the water, just up and down, all over the place. And if anybody, I've been on the ocean one time. Me and Dad went deep sea fishing one time, and it was smooth. But I've been on Lake Erie with Dad in boats when the wind was coming from the north, and you'd have 3 to 4 foot waves, and you couldn't do nothing on that boat. You try to get your line out. You could get your line out, and then you just held on because the boat would go crazy. You couldn't keep your balance. It's like me now with a stroke. It's just I'm all over the place. So these guys, these seasoned sailors are on this ship. This ship is bouncing back and forth, and Jonah is sound asleep down in the cabin of this ship. Now, I don't know how many of you guys ever, if you get really depressed or you get stressed out, you like to sleep. Oh, I'm like that. When I get myself in a situation like when I used to run jobs and a panel didn't come in time for me to get this thing hooked up, or there's a deadline coming and I'm not ready to do it, all I want to do is sleep. It's almost like an escape mechanism. If I go to sleep, I forget about everything. So I like to sleep. I think that's what Jonah was doing here. I think Jonah was so riddled with guilt from running from God and in a state of depression, knowing where he was supposed to be, but he had no interest in being there. He was stuck. And I believe because who in the world could sleep in a ship that's doing this anyway? But he was doing it. And he was sound asleep. He was so much asleep that the captain of the ship, verse 6, so the shipmaster came to him and said to him, "What meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise, call upon thy God, and if it be that God will think upon us, that we perish not." So the captain comes down, he wakes him up, says, "How in the world can you possibly be sleeping right now?" He said, "Pray to your God." Well, how do you know Jonah had a God? Well, Jonah told him in verse 3, "I'm running from God. I'm running." And in verse 10, we're going to find out how we know that. But he says, they said, "Get up. Pray to your God." They have been praying. Now listen, how many guys are on that ship? I don't know, 20, 25? I'm guessing. There's 25 guys, hardened sailors, the salts of the sea, up there with their idols and their trinkets or whatever, trying to pray their hardest to their God to get them out of this mess. This storm was so bad that it scared them. I think Dad has probably even told the story, probably here, coming back one time. He was in a storm so bad that it literally snapped his boat in half. There's a crack line that went from starboard to port, all across the hull, to the point where everybody there, including Dad, had to sleep with life jackets on. And that wasn't a storm like this. These guys were scared to death of what was going to happen. They said, "Jonah, pray to your God. Do something." So something happens. They throw out all the cargo, all their stuff. They thought they're going to die. They're thrown out. They're trying to make the boat where it's set up higher in the water. They're throwing everything they were trying to take to Tarshish, threw it overboard. So it's gone. 7. And they said, "Everyone to his fellow, come and let us cast lots, that we may know for whose cause this evil is upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Now, casting lots, real quick. There were several different ways you could cast a lot. Now, I'm going to say this. I went over to Mom and Dad's the other night. It might have been Sunday night. And I was just talking. They were asking, because they had watched the video of last week, but we were just talking a little bit about it. And as a matter of fact, I told them so much, they said they were thinking about not coming tonight because they already knew it. I'm glad they showed up. But anyway, so casting lots. And I said, what do you guys think about when you think of casting lots? Well, Mom goes, "Gambling." I go, "Well, okay. If gambling certainly is certain types of gambling certainly would be dice. Not dice like that. That's how we know dice. But there was some forms of dice that were used for casting lots. And is it godly? Is it ungodly? Is it evil? It was okay. During those days, it was okay. We find, as a matter of fact, okay. I wrote down a couple times. 7 times in the Old Testament, 1 time in the New Testament, they would cast lots to find the favor of God. You got to remember, they didn't have a completed Bible like we do. They had prophets. Prophets were the Word of God. To them, prophets were the vessel in which a message was given by God. But they would cast lots. Joshua used the lots. He would cast lots to figure out how to divide the promised land among the 12 tribes. There's several times in, let's see, there's, in Numbers, if you want the verses, come up to me afterwards. I'll give you the verses. Too much time to write down. Acts chapter 1, they cast lots to find who was going to replace Judas. Matthias. They cast lots to find out who was going to replace Judas, who had betrayed Christ and committed suicide. So casting lots was not a bad thing. Now, there are times I think that God allows people to do, pagan people to do their things, and God makes it work. I think of one time when Saul went to the witch of Endor, and he wanted to speak to Samuel. Well, God said, watch this, Samuel, go talk to him. Samuel shows up, scares the witch to death because she wasn't expecting it. But God allowed something that was not typical. Most of the lots we find here in the Bible are done by believers, and they were doing it trying to find the will of God. These sailors just decided they were going to cast lots. Now, another means of lots, they'd have a bag. And in the bag, they might have a blue stone, a red stone, a black stone, a white stone. We'll say the white's already there because you can't see it. That way I don't have to worry about trying to get a marker. They would have a bag. And what you would do is you would determine what stone are we going to make the decision. We're going to say the blue stone. So they grab in the bag. Everybody grabs it. Out comes the blue stone, and there's that person. Now, possible that this could have been the way of doing it. I don't think so. I think what they did, this is supposed to be a hand. I personally think they drew straws. The only reason I say that is because that's one thing you can do like this. All right, pick one. They cast lots, and it came upon Jonah. And they look at Jonah, and look at verse 8. So then said they unto him, tell us, we pray thee, for whose cause this evil is upon us? What is thine occupation, and whence comest thou? What is thy country, and what people art thou? It goes to Jonah, and they pick Jonah. They said, okay. They start the interrogation process. What do you do for a living? Where are you? What's your nationality? Where are you from? He says this in verse 9. And he said to them, I am a Hebrew. He's a Jew. And so he answered, what's your nationality? He goes, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven. And they're going, okay, fine. But then he goes, that which hath made the sea and the land. So they're out to sea. Their life is in danger. And all of a sudden, they cast these lots, and it falls upon Jonah. And they go, Jonah, what are you doing? What's going on here? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? He's a prophet of God. He's a prophet of God. And he was on the run from God. Look at verse 10. Then were the men exceedingly afraid and said unto him, Why hast thou done this? For the men knew that he had fled from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. So what happens? Man, I've got to hurry up. I'm afraid to put him in the water because he'll have to hold his breath for like 6 weeks. And if I kill Jonah, we got to change all of our Bibles, and that just can't happen. But we're going to have to. I mean, that's the way it's going to be. So they're scared to death. They're scared to death of what's going to happen now because Jonah, this prophet running from God, had just said, I am a Jew. I believe in the God of the Lord of the heavens, who made the sea and the land. And it scared them to death. And they go, what in the world are we to do to you? And it says, Then they said unto them, What shall we do unto thee, that the sea may be calm unto us? For the sea wrought and was tempestuous. It was getting, that right there means it was getting worse. As they were standing there talking to him, it was getting worse. What are we going to do with you? Jonah's a prophet. And I think Jonah's a prophet whether he was in God's will or not, because he prophesied something to them and it came true. He said unto them, Take me up and cast me forth into the sea, so shall the sea be calm unto you, for I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. Now, here's where I'm going to have to stop, because there's no way I can get any more in. I told you guys last week I hadn't taught in 16 years. The reason I hadn't is I ran from God. For 16 years. I was mad at him. I was mad. And I ran from God for 16 years. Jonah was running from God. And it wasn't just him. The old saying is, no man is an island. It's true. Whatever decision you make in life affects everyone around you, everybody that you know. What did it do to these men? Jonah said, I know that this storm is here because of me. He put the whole crew of that ship going to Tarshish in danger. He cost them cargo. They threw stuff out trying to save. He says, throw me over. If you throw me over, that'll be it. The sea will calm down. Well, they didn't want to do that. To them, it was murder. They had no idea who Jonah was, other than he worshiped this God that evidently was having great control of the sea that they were on. And they said, we're not going to throw you over. We're going to try to get to shore. And it says, verse 13, to them it was murder. They weren't going to do this. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring it to the land, but they could not, for the sea wrought and was tempestuous against them. They said, we're not going to do this. Let's try to row this thing to shore. There was no way they could do it. So as they realized that what they were doing was a futile attempt, they did something that Jonah should have done from the very beginning. Wherefore they cried unto the Lord and said, We beseech thee, O Lord, we beseech thee, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not upon us innocent blood, for thou, O Lord, hast done as it pleased thee. Even these Phoenician sailors understood that there was no way to get out of this except they're going to have to do what Jonah said. And we'll close here in just a second. So they took up Jonah and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly and offered a sacrifice unto the Lord and made vows. We're going to stop there reading because I'm not going to go any further. I'm not going to put Jonah in the whale yet. That's just too much. But I want you guys to understand something. When they threw him over, the water ceased immediately. It was what they call a slick. You ever been on the ocean or on a lake where it's like glass? It became glass. And these men who were pagan Phoenician sailors who grew up on idolatry realized that Jonah's God was the true God. And they made sacrifices right then and made vows to him to serve him. I would love to know what happened to these guys when they finally got to Tarshish. You know, Scott and I and Jody, we compare stories of what happened to us at school 30 years ago down at Bible college. And I just wondered, did these guys ever talk? Did they ever, man, remember that time we were, here's the problem, and we're done right here. They had no idea what was going to happen to Jonah. They didn't have the book yet, so they couldn't read ahead to see what would happen. All they know is that they were going to throw a man of God over into a tempestuous sea. I am amazed how God can still bless. God can still bless his message despite the shape of the messenger. Last thing right now. When Constance and I started dating and got married, she knew, I said, I used to be in a church. I used to work in a church a lot. And one day, it was a History Channel, Discovery Channel, whatever, there was a biblical story. And I go, well, that ain't totally correct. It's a Hollywood version. So she said, well, what was it? So I told her the story. I can't remember what the story was. And it got to the point where after we'd eat, we'd sit on the couch and she'd say, tell me another Bible story. So I went through Daniel in the Lion's Den, all the basic Sunday school lesson for kids. She'd never heard it before. And I got to do this. Then one day, and I'm done. I know I'm done. Just give me just a second. Give me a second. I know, 8 o'clock, and it's like a couple minutes after. But one night, I rented on demand, Left Behind. It was a movie with Nicolas Cage based off the Left Behind series. I know probably about everybody's ever read them. And I want to tell you something. Of all the movies I've ever seen, that movie and the rapture moment put a chill up my spine. When the kids were at that playground in the mall and they were on the Ferris wheel, and there was a bright flash and a clap of thunder, and all of a sudden, kids' clothes started drifting to the ground. And I remember Constance, she says, what was that? Because when it happened, I went, man, because I'd never seen anything like it. And it's how I could picture it. She goes, what is that? And I said, that is the rapture. And she said, will I be a part of that? I go, only if you've been saved. And she started asking questions, and I had, typically on Wednesday nights here, you'll see me, I got a little red New Testament because we're doing Colossians. I got a little red New Testament. I had that sitting right there on the end table. Do you remember this? And I turned around, And I showed her the Romans road. And I told her what she needed to do. She said, I want to do that. I said, okay. Do you want me to be? She goes, no, I want to do it by myself. So she goes back into the bedroom. She's back there for a little bit. She comes back out. She says, I did it. I asked Jesus to save me. I was in no shape to witness to anybody. But God, just like Jonah, God used the situation and converted a whole crew of men on a ship. Even though Jonah was the way he was. Okay, we're done. Let's all stand. I would ask Dad to pray, but he'd never make it. So I want to ask John. Well, John, have you prayed tonight? You haven't prayed tonight, have you? You haven't prayed tonight, have you? No. Okay. We're supposed to pray every day, John. What's wrong with you? No, go ahead. If you would, dismiss the prayer, please.